Naman Navats, Naman Navats, Naman Navats, Naman Navats, Naman Navats. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be a part of your service today at the Berkeley Buddhist Temple. I'd like to thank Kuhara Sensei for inviting me to be a speaker for your Eshini-sama and Kakushini-sama special service, in which we honor Eshini-sama, the wife of Shinran Shonin, and Kakushini-sama, the daughter of Shinran Shonin and Eshini-sama, who really helped to establish the Honganji. I've often spoken of Ishini-sama at our own OCBC BWA special services. And one thing that I often mention is that Ishini-sama and Shinran Shonin each regarded each other as bodhisattvas of compassion. Ishini-sama looked up to Shinran Shonin. Shinran Shonin also respected and revered his wife, Ishini, as a bodhisattva of compassion. And I once mentioned this in a sermon at another temple. And later in a discussion that followed the service, one lady said, well, you know, if I was married to Shinran Shonin, I'm sure I could see Shinran Shonin as a bodhisattva of compassion, but not my husband. I could never see my husband as a bodhisattva of compassion. And we all kind of laughed. But then I mentioned that, well, the fact that Ishini-sama is able to look at her husband Shinran Shonin as a bodhisattva of compassion is not just a reflection of the greatness of Shinran Shonin. It's a reflection of the humbleness of Ishini-sama. Because Ishini-sama is humble, she is able to look up to her husband Shinran Shonin as a bodhisattva of compassion. Shinran Shonin, because he is humble, is able to look up to his wife Ishini-sama as a bodhisattva of compassion. So the fact that they're able to regard each other as bodhisattvas of compassion is not just about the greatness of each person, it's about the humbleness of each person. Because they are humbled through the Nembutsu teachings, now they are able to look up at each other as bodhisattvas of compassion. That's something that I often mention when we talk about Ishini-sama. Kakushini-sama is significant because she cared for her father, Shinran Shonin, in his later years. And then after his passing, then established sort of a mausoleum or grave site there for where Shinran Shonin passed, where his ashes were kept. And then that was the start of the first Honganji temple. So she was most significant in helping to establish Jodo Shinshu and our Honganji. There are many women that are most significant in the Buddhist tradition and in the Shin Buddhist tradition. And today I'd like to reflect on a woman myōkōnin and her life that to me is most fascinating story. And I'd like to talk about the myōkōnin Okaru. So first of all, myōkōnin are the most deeply spiritual people in the Shin Buddhist tradition. And our Shin Buddhist tradition is rich with a history of deep and profound spiritual people that we call myōkōnin, like Saichi, Genza, and others. Perhaps you have heard stories about the myōkōnin. They are very striking in that in many cases they were not very educated. Some, maybe elementary school level, could just barely read or write. Some couldn't read or write at all. Okaru was such a person. And so the poems that we have by Okaru were composed by Okaru, but were written by the minister of her area because she could not write. So I'd like to tell a little bit about Okaru. She lived in the late 1800s, and she lived in a village and was not a very popular young woman because she was very outspoken and very feisty. That was not characteristic of young women during that time. And so because she was so outspoken and so feisty, all of the young men in the village disliked Okaru. They disliked her so much that they all made sort of an agreement, and they said, none of us are going to marry Okaru. That way she'll grow up to be an old maid. To that extent, she was disliked by other young men in her village. So she had a hard time getting married, but finally she was able to get married. And she married a farmer. Of course, many people were farmers in those days who raised sweet potatoes. So she was so happy to be married. Well, unknown to Okaru, her husband began to have a love affair with a woman in town when he would take the sweet potatoes into town to sell the sweet potatoes. Isn't this sermon getting interesting now? Talking about love affairs, like watching a soap opera on TV. The Young and the Restless, Another World, or whatever soap operas you like. So Okaru, her husband, has this love affair, and other people in the village know about it. But because nobody likes Okaru, they help to protect the husband. And she does not know about this love affair for quite some time. Finally, she finds out about the love affair, and she is devastated, like anyone would be. And she begins to fight and argue with her husband about his love affair. In her sort of depression and her bitterness and anger about her marital situation, she seeks sort of counsel or help. And she goes to see the local minister in her village. His name was Reverend Gendo. Reverend Gendo must have been a tremendous minister based on how he counseled Okaru. So Okaru goes to Reverend Gendo and she pours out her heart. Oh, my husband is having this love affair when he sells the sweet potatoes in town, and she shares her dilemma with Reverend Gendo. Reverend Gendo listens and listens, doesn't say anything. After she finishes, Reverend Gendo, in Japanese, I'll first say it, he says, "Yokatta ne. That's good. That's good." Okaru was so angered. What? How could you say, "That's good, yokatta ne"? She ran out of the temple. She was so furious. But because she's such a feisty young woman, she decides to go back and challenge that minister. The nerve of that guy to say something like that to me, here, seeking his counsel. So she goes back in. She says to the minister, to Reverend Gendo, "What do you mean by that? How could you say, yokatta ne? How could you say that is good when I'm having this terrible dilemma?" And then Reverend Gendo said to her, "Okaru, what I meant by that was, this is the first time you have ever stepped foot into this temple. Now you have the real opportunity to meet with the Buddha-Dharma. Yokatta ne. Yokatta ne. That's good. That's good. You're encountering the Buddha-Dharma." So now Okaru begins to think differently about her situation. And she listens to Reverend Gendo. And she listens to whenever he gives sermons. And then she becomes a real listener of the Dharma. And she listens wherever there's sermons being given. And she begins to have deeper spiritual understanding of the Dharma and of Namo Amida Butsu. So then, one day at a service at Reverend Gendo's temple, there was a gathering, the Hondo was filled, and all of a sudden, Okaru stands up and she says, "I have something to say." And everyone is kind of, "Oh no, what is Okaru going to say?" She's such an outspoken woman. And she says to everyone, the filled Hondo, she says to them, "I would like to take this opportunity to thank my husband for having the love affair that enabled me to meet with the Buddha-Dharma." And she sat down. Isn't that amazing? To publicly say to everyone, "Thank you to my husband for having the love affair that enabled me to meet with the Buddha-Dharma." Now, I should say to all the men that are listening to this message today, don't misunderstand the point of this message. Don't leave this service today and think, "Hey, Reverend Harada said it's okay to have a love affair. That way my wife will really encounter the Buddha-Dharma." That's not the point of the sermon. But see how that transformed for Okaru. And I often share this story as a way of illustrating how Jodo Shinshu and Buddhism enables us to go beyond the world of morality and ethics. See, to go beyond morality and ethics. If you stay on the level of morality and ethics, Okaru, she should have got a good divorce lawyer. She should have gotten half of the farm or something like that, right? On the level of morality and divorce the guy, get half the farm. And even if her marriage ends in divorce, then perhaps she's still not spiritually has resolved that conflict. But through the Buddha-Dharma, now she looks back, and if it wasn't for my husband's love affair, I would not have been able to truly encounter the Dharma. Truly encounter the Dharma. So, Okaru's life and her story is also a way of understanding how the Dharma can help us to go even beyond a moral ethical issue. Okaru was a real Nembutsu follower, and she became a real listener of the Dharma. And we have so many wonderful stories of myōkōnin. Many of them were women. Many of them were women. And women have been just as pivotal in the propagation of the Buddha-Dharma as men. Although in the Buddhist tradition we have more monks and the great masters, but women have all played a most important role. Today, in honoring Eshini-sama and Kakushini-sama, may we honor the women in the Buddhist tradition and in the Shin Buddhist tradition, and today reflect on the life and insight and spiritual transformation of the myōkōnin Okaru. Namandots, 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 namandots. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your service this morning.